Well, hello and welcome. This video is a presentation I did to the group about this time last year, and my audio-visual piece did not work. So my supporting slides did not work. So I'm reshooting it now, one, because it didn't work before, two, a test for our YouTube channel and how we can produce videos and all that. So here we go. The Civil War Roundtable of St. Charles County, this is in conjunction with them. Here's a little bit about me. If you would like to pause and read that, you can, but just a piece about some of my, I guess, credentials and how I got here and things I've done. We're going to talk about the political situation in Missouri in 1861 and some of the things that led to the Battle of Wilson's Creek, but we're going to talk about this from more of a political viewpoint, I guess you would say. So here's our agenda. We're going to talk about some key players. We're going to do an overview of the timeline. We're going to talk about Missouri's first convention session, the Camp Jackson Affair, the Price-Harney Conference, the Planters House Conference, and then we'll talk later about the 2nd through 5th convention sessions. So first, Sterling Price, referred to as Old Pap, born in Virginia, studied law, moved to Missouri, married a fellow Virginian, and settles in Keytesville, Missouri. Here's a map of Keytesville. Keytesville, if you look at that and know a little bit about Missouri geography, that's really in the Little Dixie area, which ran along the Missouri River in the center of the state, also up into Liberty, Jackson County, etc. So north and east of Kansas City all the way through essentially Columbia was kind of that Little Dixie area. That pro-Southern slaveholding economy, a lot of hemp growing plantations, things of that nature. That's where he settled, so that's going to shape a lot of Sterling Price's political views. He has 5 sons and 1 daughter who live past infancy. He's going to be appointed a colonel of the Missouri militia. He's going to lead an expedition against the Mormons, basically drive them out of Missouri back over to Nauvoo, Illinois. By 1840, very successful. He's planting tobacco. He's elected to the state legislature. In 1842, he's elected Speaker of the Missouri House. In 1844, he's elected congressman, U.S. congressman. In 1846, he resigns Congress and he gets an Army commission at the request of Senator Thomas Hart Benton. He's ordered to raise a regiment of volunteer infantry, but he raises a regiment of cavalry instead. He's stationed in Santa Fe, New Mexico under Stephen Watts Kearny. He doesn't do a lot there because he's suffering from cholera, but he'll later lead an expedition against the Pueblo Indians and recapture the city of Chihuahua, Mexico. And he's made a brevet brigadier general as a result of this. After the war, he returns to Missouri. The Democratic Party splits over slavery. Price joins the pro-slavery, anti-Thomas Hart Benton faction. Prior to this, him and Benton had been friends, but now they're going to split, and he's going to join the other faction of the Democratic Party. There was a Whig Party at this time. It wasn't super a contender in Missouri politics. Really, the 2 factions of the Democratic Party were the ones that really were at war against each other. He is elected governor and serves from 1853 to 1857. He helps create Washington University, helps to create the Missouri State Teachers Association and the public school system. So he's got a lot of positives there. He is the bank commissioner until 1861 then. He supports Stephen Douglas in 1860. He is a pro-union guy, a conditional unionist. And unfortunately, his personal documents are destroyed in a fire in 1885. So a lot of primary source material that we don't have, a lot of letters and copies of orders and things that were lost in that fire. So here's a trivia question. There were 2 movies that had a character named Sterling Price. Can you name them? I'll give you a hint. They're both John Wayne movies. Well, they were Rooster Cogburn and True Grit. So Rooster Cogburn's cat was named Sterling Price because the Rooster Cogburn character had served with Sterling Price with the Missouri Confederate forces. Claiborne Fox Jackson's born in Kentucky. In 1806, he's elected to the Missouri legislature. He's a state senator. He leads the fight to repeal the Missouri Compromise because he doesn't want restrictions on slavery north of 3630. He wants that whole Louisiana Purchase territory opened up to slavery. So he is the leader of the anti-Benton faction. We'll talk about why those two things, those two wings of the Democratic Party split, but they split over slavery, basically. He's sworn in as governor on January 3rd, 1861, and almost immediately calls for a constitutional convention to try to take Missouri out of the Union. He will die of cancer in December of the following year, so he's governor on paper at least just under 2 years from January 1861 through December 1862. Thomas Hart Benton's born in North Carolina, but lives a good chunk of his younger life in Nashville. He's an aide-de-camp to Andrew Jackson in the War of 1812. Later on, they will get in a dispute over a duel and over Jackson's role in that duel. And basically, Thomas Hart Benton and his brother Jesse will fight against Andrew Jackson and some of his friends. And there's some debate as to who shot who, but somebody's bullet, either Thomas Hart Benton or Jesse Benton's bullet, lodged in Andrew Jackson's shoulder and was in it for, I think, his whole life. I think he died with that bullet in the shoulder, if I'm not mistaken. He's elected Missouri's second U.S. Senator. They flip a coin to decide who's first and who's second. And he supports Missouri entering the Union as a slave state. This will change later, but he's initially pro-slavery. His wife is Henry Clay's cousin, so he knows Henry Clay. They are related by marriage. We'll find out there's a lot of that related by marriage going on. He supports Andrew Jackson. Later on, they have a reconciliation after they tried to kill each other. He supports Andrew Jackson in his first bid for the presidency in 1824 when John Quincy Adams is elected, and then also in 1828 and 1832. He's a mentor to Frank Blair because, well, Frank Blair is from that same neck of the woods in Kentucky. He gives an anti-slavery speech in 1849, which we'll show you an excerpt of here. And the Jackson Democrats never forgave him for it. And by Jackson, I mean Claiborne Fox Jackson, not Andrew Jackson. They never forgave him for it. So in 1851, they did not reelect him to the Senate. They kicked him out. Back in that time, the legislatures controlled who they picked for Senate. It was not a direct vote of the people. It was a vote of the legislature. The legislature was controlled by Claiborne, by the Jackson faction, so to speak, so they kicked him out. Today in the national capital, there's a statuary hall. Each state has two people that they have statues for. Missouri as well. One is Thomas Hart Benton. If you can guess who the other one is, well, that means you know some stuff, but I'm going to tell you here in a second who the other one is. So here's Benton's anti-slavery speech that he gives later in his career. He says, "My personal sentiments then are against the institution of slavery and against its introduction into places in which it does not exist. If there was no slavery in Missouri today, I should oppose its coming in." Here's Benton, hardcore Democrat, essentially espousing the same position on slavery as Abraham Lincoln did in the 1858 Lincoln-Douglas debate. The new Republican Party is a platform opposing the extension of slavery. Thomas Hart Benton also opposes the extension of slavery, so that's interesting. The Missouri Democrats kicked him out for it. The other statue we have right now is of Francis Preston Blair Jr. He's born in Lexington in 1821. This is how he knows Thomas Hart Benton. He's the son of Andrew Jackson's newspaper editor, who's Montgomery Blair. If you saw the Lincoln movie, Montgomery Blair, who's Francis Preston Blair's dad, and Monty Blair, who's Francis Preston Blair's brother, are portrayed in that movie. Secretary of State William Sewell says, well, if you want to get this amendment passed, you know who you got to go see. He goes to see Montgomery Blair. Montgomery Blair is the leader of a very conservative faction of the Republican Party, but he is a Republican. Francis Preston Blair practices law 1842 to 1845 in Thomas Hart Benton's law office. Doesn't hurt to be practicing in the law office of a senator. Stephen Watts Kearny appoints him Attorney General of the New Mexico Territory. Well, guess who else is out in the New Mexico Territory? Sterling Price. So all these folks knew each other. He's elected to the Missouri House in 1852 and serves till 1856. Then he's elected a Republican U.S. congressman for the state of Missouri, 56 to 58, and also in 60. I don't know what happened in the 2 years from 1858 to 1860. But anyway, Francis Preston Blair Jr. Resigns in 1860. Why? Because he becomes a Union officer. He owned the Missouri Democrat newspaper, even though he was a Republican. It was called the Missouri Democrat. He organized the Wide Awakes. We could have a whole video, a whole session on the Wide Awakes. That's a whole nother interesting topic. In St. Louis, he advocates, he basically gets General Harney kicked out and replaced by this young hot-headed captain named Nathaniel Lyon. He'll go on to command a division of Vicksburg. He'll command a corps under Sherman during the March to the Sea. Later on, he will make some white supremacist, racist comments. In 1868, he'll join the Democrats. In 1871, he'll go back to the Senate from Missouri, but this time as a Democrat. In 1872, he's paralyzed, I think, from a stroke. He will die from a bad fall in 1875. He's buried here in St. Louis at Bell Fountain Cemetery, as is Sterling Price. So, William S. Harney, born in Nashville in 1800, near Nashville. Who else is from Nashville? Andrew Jackson. Harney will serve directly under Jackson in 1818, and he's a personal aide to him in Florida. So Harney knows Jackson. Thomas Hart Benton knows Jackson. Sterling Price, associated with Jackson. William Harney will marry Mary Melanphy in 1833. She's the daughter of the wealthiest man in St. Louis. Her niece is Sterling Price's wife. Sterling Price's wife grew up in the Melanphy mansion. Even though she's niece, Sterling Price's wife is niece to Harney's wife, they're more have like a sister relationship. He'll be indicted for murder for killing an enslaved woman while stationed at Jefferson Barracks. He wanted the keys to the Melanphy mansion, and she wouldn't give them to him, so he basically tortured her for 3 days until she died. So let's not think that he's a wonderful guy here, because he is not. Hannah's daughter was fathered by Mary's father, so there was a lot of abuse going on there. The trial is fixed. They basically get a change of venue to Union, Missouri, which is a little bit more friendly to him, and he gets acquitted of murder. He'll go on to command a brigade in Twiggs's division in the Mexican War. Jefferson Davis called him physically the finest specimen of a man I ever saw. So keep in mind, he's a Southerner. He is related by marriage to Sterling Price. He is married into a wealthy slaveholding family in St. Louis, but he's a Union officer. Probably in a good spot for conciliation here. At age 61, he becomes the youngest general officer in the Army at age 61, if you can believe that. It tells you the average age of the Civil War generals. So he's promoted at the same time in 1858 as, so there's also Davy Twiggs, Winfield Scott, and General Wool are the other. So there's basically 4 general officers in the United States Army at that time in 1858. When the Civil War breaks out, he's commanding what's called the Department of the West, that's headquartered at Jefferson Barracks. He'll later be replaced by Nathaniel Lyon, and he essentially retires. But he gets what's called at the time a brevet promotion, a major general in 1865, but really doesn't see any action. What do these guys have in common so far? Well, they're all, one time or another, had been Democrats. They're all slaveholders. They all have direct or indirect ties to Andrew Jackson. So they have a lot in common. They all kind of knew each other. They moved in the same circles. They were all fairly wealthy people. Enter Nathaniel Lyon, who is not a Southerner, not a slaveholder. He's born in Connecticut. He graduated from West Point. None of these other people did. Harney may have. I cannot recall if he did or not, but he served in the Mexican War, where he received a brevet promotion to first lieutenant and then to captain, which is why he's called Captain Lyon here. Served at Fort Riley, Kansas during the Bleeding Kansas incidents. In March 1861, he'll be commanding Company B of the 2nd U.S. Infantry, which is under the purview of Harney, but it's to be stationed at the Federal Arsenal in St. Louis. Where's the arsenal in St. Louis? Right down the hill from the Budweiser Brewery, between the brewery and the river. It's still there today. You can still go see it. Got some interesting buildings there. There's one building there that looks very similar to the building at Harper's Ferry that John Brown commandeered during his raid on Harper's Ferry. It almost looks like a carbon copy of it. It's at our arsenal in St. Louis, very similar to the Harper's Ferry arsenal. But Lyon is a captain under the command of Brigadier General Harney, and we'll see later he's very insubordinate. So January 3rd, Claiborne Fox Jackson sworn in as governor. January 16th, the General Assembly, which is pretty pro-Southern, passes legislation calling for a convention for delegates from each Senate district. February 28th, the state convention meets in Jefferson City. March 4th, they reconvene in St. Louis. They did not want to stay in Jefferson City, where they promptly vote 98-1 against secession. We'll talk about that in a second. Then they disperse, they disband, they go back to their homes. April 13th and 14th, the Confederates will bombard Fort Sumter. April 15th, Lincoln will call for his 75,000 volunteers. May 10th, you have the Camp-Jackson Affair. May 21st, you have the Price-Harney Agreement. June 11th, you have the Planters House Hotel Conference. All these things we're going to talk about coming up. In June, Lyon will occupy Jefferson City. In July, they'll reconvene the convention, and they'll appoint Unionists as provisional state officers. So Missouri is, at least on paper, a Union state. Claiborne Jackson declares Missouri a free republic on August 5th. No one really listens to that, but August 10th is the Battle of Wilson's Creek. Not till October does the State Assembly meeting in Neosho pass a secession ordinance. November 28th, the Confederate Congress will quote-unquote admit Missouri as the 12th Confederate state. Well, the first session of the state convention, they elect a president, and the president they elect is Sterling Price, which would make you think, okay, Claiborne Fox Jackson's going to get his secession declaration because Price is a slaveholder. Price is from the Little Dixie area. Price was born in Virginia. But remember, Price was a pro-Douglas Democrat. He believed, and he was a conditional Unionist. In fact, Unionists, to a degree, made up all 99 delegates. They all ran on a pro-Union platform. 82 of these delegates were born in the South. So Claiborne Fox Jackson thinks he's got this in the bag. They're going to take Missouri out of the Union. But no, there was nobody that ran on a secessionist platform. They meet in Jefferson City. They promptly say, why don't we go to St. Louis? There's a lot more going on there. There's nicer hotels and restaurants. They pack up. They move to St. Louis. They reject secession by a vote of 98-1. Here's the Mercantile Library where they met. Today, this is just south of actually where I work. There's MX Movies is in that area, Snarf's, High Point. It's the nucleus of the old St. Louis Center Mall. The building, of course, is not there anymore, but that's kind of the area that the Mercantile Library building was in. They passed these resolutions, and basically the resolutions say we want to remain neutral. We support what at the time was called the Crittenden Compromise. We believe that we can work this out. We don't think that the Union should compel the South, and we don't think the South should attack the North, and we want to stay neutral. And if you guys attack each other, it's gonna plunge us into civil war. And by the way, we're gonna meet again the third Monday in December. And if we want, we can have a committee could call us back into session. But if not, we're going to meet the third Monday in December, so everybody, goodbye. Well, this is not what Claiborne Fox Jackson wanted. And they're not meeting again until December, so his next chance to call this convention back into session to amend the Constitution to make Missouri a slave state will now not be till December. If there is a provision, the committee could call him back. So here's our first counterfactual. Lincoln calls for 75,000 volunteers on April 15th, which leads to Virginia, North Carolina, and Arkansas seceding. What if Missouri's convention was in session through April 15th? It's possible that they would have been angry enough, because a lot of these Mid-South states were angry enough to secede after Lincoln called for these 75,000 volunteers because they saw it as coercion. Had Missouri's convention been in session, maybe they would have voted to secede as well. We don't have any way of knowing, but it's interesting to think about. So, Nathaniel Lyon and Montgomery Blair, Frank Blair, begin raising and drilling some pro-Union volunteers. The pro-secessionist forces also start drilling. Lincoln authorized supports of Blair's militia. He musters them into federal service on April 1st. It's basically, I think, 5 or 6 regiments that have been drilling, and under Nathaniel Lyon. So here's an active duty captain who's drilling these basically pro-Union militia. Harney maybe knows about it but doesn't do anything. Grant goes down to Belleville, Illinois, and confers with Lyon and Blair. And it's like, yeah, this makes sense. Grant is up in Springfield organizing the first 6 Illinois regiments. He comes down to confer with Lyon and Blair, and it's like, wow, you guys have some regiments down here too. This is great. Maybe we can work together. Eventually, Grant will bring one of those regiments across the river into the northeastern Missouri area there. So there's 6,500 pro-Union troops in, like I said, 6, maybe 7 regiments. There's 700 secessionist troops, and they've got 4 cannons that they captured from the arsenal in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And they're drilling, and they're supposed to disband on May 11th. What they want to do is they want to capture the arsenal, and they want to get the weapons at the arsenal that Lyon is in command of. Harney's out of town. If he had been in town, he might have ordered Lyon not to pursue this. But what happens is Lyon surrounds Camp Jackson and captures the militia without firing a shot. Now, there's a legend that he had reconnoitered Camp Jackson. By the way, Camp Jackson, named after Claiborne Fox Jackson. That he got in a wagon and drove around wearing Frank Blair's mother-in-law's dress. That doesn't seem likely to me. I don't think he needed to do that. I think he could have just walked around to his leisure, because all they were doing was drilling. Now, by the way, they're going to disband anyway, but Lyon decides to go get them. So he captures it, and they have a 4.5 mile, about a 90-minute march back to the arsenal. At this time, 28 civilians are killed, 75 civilians are wounded, 3 of the pro-Confederate militia are killed, 2 of the Federal militia are killed. Here's where Camp Jackson is, basically Grand and Laclede Avenue, which is kind of where Highway 40/64 runs today. This is where Camp Jackson is. I don't know what route they exactly took. This is a modern map that kind of shows that it would take you 1 hour and 36 minutes to walk that 4.5 miles from UMSL down to the arsenal. And you'll notice today there's a park in front of the arsenal called Lyon Park, named after Nathaniel Lyon. But that's ish the route they took. There were 5 current and future Civil War generals were present and took part in this and watched it. Who were they? Well, Lyon was there, Grant was there, Sherman was there as observers, Price was there observing, and Daniel Frost was the general in command of the pro-Confederate forces. As soon as the news of the capture of Camp Jackson reached the city, the condition of affairs was changed. Union men became rampant, aggressive, and, if you will, intolerant. They proclaimed their sentiments boldly and were impatient of anything like disrespect for the Union. Who said it? Well, it was Ulysses S. Grant said it in his memoirs, because he did witness it. What if the secession convention was in session on May 10th? The pro-Southern forces were angered by this. Lyon had no authority to go capture these guys. They were the Southerners at Camp Jackson were the duly constituted state militia. They were drilling under the authority of Claiborne Fox Jackson, who was the duly elected governor. Lyon really had no authority to go do anything to these guys, but he launched a preemptive strike. Frank Blair wanted aggressiveness. Harney did not want aggressiveness. So if they had been in convention still on May 10th, they might have voted to take Missouri out of the Union then as well. Price is outraged by the deaths at Camp Jackson. So is the rest of the state. So people are starting to converge on Jefferson City, pro-Confederate volunteers. Jackson realizes his troops are woefully unprepared. He's trying to give them state support, but remember, the former Wide Awakes that are now drilling in St. Louis with Captain Lyon, they have federal support. Lincoln had federalized these units, so they have now federal money supporting them. arsenal weapons, etc. The pro-Confederates have state support. On May 11th, the legislature passes what's called the military bill. They create the Missouri State Guard. They name Sterling Price as the commander. State secessionist leaders are just outraged at what happened at Camp Jackson, so they're going to start building their army, but they need to buy time. All the troops in St. Louis had been captured. They were paroled afterward, I think, but they'd been captured. Whatever weapons they had were captured. They have 1,000 unorganized militia in Jefferson City. They need to reassemble the convention to modify the Constitution to take Missouri out of the Union. They need to get Confederate recognition, so their tactic is they're going to talk peace, we're going to prepare for war, we're going to cloak the whole thing in neutrality. So Price leaves for St. Louis. The Lieutenant Governor Reynolds leaves for Richmond, and his mission is to get Jefferson Davis to send in Confederate troops as soon as possible. Harney's motivation is to keep Missouri in the Union by conciliating them but being firm, gradual restoration of federal control, and just calm everything down. That's his motivation. He thinks that'll work. Of course, Frank Blair and Nathaniel Lyon don't think that'll work. The pro-Confederate lieutenant governor was furious that Price is going to go to St. Louis and talk to Harney. He thinks they should not negotiate with these people. But Price, who was the president of the convention that voted not to take Missouri out of the Union, is now the commander of these state troops. So Lieutenant Governor Reynolds, he goes to Richmond and he really badmouths Price and Jackson to Jefferson Davis, and there's great misunderstanding here. Well, the Price-Harney conference, I have done a lot of research. I don't know where it took place. It could have been at the Melanphy Mansion. It could have been at the Planters House Hotel. It could have been at some other hotel. It could have been at Jefferson Barracks. But basically, here's the agreement. Federal troops will control St. Louis. The state militia will control the rest of the state and, quote-unquote, keep order. So you stay in St. Louis. Don't interfere with us. We won't interfere with you. Because why is Price making this? Because he needs time. He needs time to organize, drill, train the troops, supply the troops, and he's got 1,000 troops, and he knows the pro-Union forces have 6,000, so he doesn't want any trouble. Here's Richmond's perspective, though. Your military commander presided over a convention that overwhelmingly decided to stay in the Union. Your governor and your military commander just signed an agreement allowing the federal government to operate in St. Louis unmolested. You haven't seceded from the Union. You haven't joined the Confederacy. And your lieutenant governor is here in town bad-mouthing you. Well, no wonder there was problems, right? This could have all been solved with texts. Davis could have texted Sterling Price and say, "Yo, bro, what you doing?" Anyway, that's not what happened because communications then were not like they are now. So, well, Blair is a congressman, right, still until 1861 when he would resign. Middle of 1861, he lobbies Lincoln. He's like, Harney just made a deal with the devil. You can't trust these guys. You need to get rid of him. So Lincoln fires Harney. They promote Nathaniel Lyon to brigadier general. He goes from captain to general. So Nathaniel Lyon goes behind his boss's back, gets a political sponsor that goes to Lincoln, has Harney kicked out, has Lyon installed. Kind of a snake move, if you ask me. Price and Jackson then go to St. Louis to meet with Lyon and Blair. Their agreement was with Harney. Harney's out. They want to meet with Nathaniel Lyon and Frank Blair and renew this. Lyon says, rather concede to the state of Missouri for one single instant the right to dictate to my government in any manner, however unimportant. I would see you and every man, woman, and child in the state dead and buried. This means war. So you think he was in a mood to compromise with them like Harney does? No. So Jackson and Price get escorted out of the lines around St. Louis, and as they go back to, Jackson and Price, as they go back to Jefferson City, they destroy telegraph wires, they burn bridges, they know what's coming. Lyon puts troops on steamboats, and he's in Jefferson City on June 13th. In 2 days, he gets those regiments to Jeff City, his 6,000 troops. The state government flees to Boonville. On June 17th, Lyon clashes with the State Guard troops at Boonville, and the Missouri troops have to retreat further into southwest Missouri. I just wonder what would happen if George McClellan could have moved his troops in 2 days, like Lyon did. If he'd have moved that fast during the Peninsula Campaign, would we have a completely different war? I mean, Lyon was aggressive. I'll have to give him that. The second session meets on July 22nd in Jefferson City, and guess what? This time Jefferson City is now occupied by federal troops. They elect Hamilton Gamble as the governor. They elect Willard Hall as the lieutenant governor, Mordecai Oliver, George Caleb Bingham, and basically they say in November we'll have elections to fill the rest of the offices. These 4 men are the government until then. And so the state convention reconvenes in Jeff City, not the legislature, and they just say, you guys are in charge, we'll elect you. And Lincoln then recognizes them as the legitimate state government. Why? It served his purposes to do so. He has now a nominally pro-union government. There's really 2 governments. There's this government that was installed by the convention. There was also the duly elected government that was elected through the normal processes. It's going to retreat down to Neosho, Missouri. So prior to Wilson's Creek on August 10th, remember, Price headed a convention that voted not to secede. Price made an agreement with Harmony to not have a war. Jackson, Claiborne Fox Jackson, declared Missouri as an independent republic, but not that it's joined the Confederacy. Wilson's Creek was on August 10th, but the secession declaration, which we'll talk about here in a second, didn't pass until October. We wonder why Ben McCulloch was reluctant to cooperate with Price. After they win the Battle of Wilson's Creek, McCulloch said, I'm not following you up the railroad up to Rolla, up the railroad to St. Louis to recapture the state. We don't have the authorization to do that. And by the way, you're not a Confederate state anyway. You're neutral, and I've got my orders. I'm going back to Arkansas. So, third counterfactual, I guess, what would have happened if they would have passed the ordinance of secession after Wilson's Creek? Would Ben McCulloch's Confederate forces have joined Sterling Price, and would Missouri still be in the Union? Well, of course, we won't know. So he says, the government says, it's in vain to hope for a restoration of amicable relations between Missouri and the other United States of America under the same government, and it's not desirable if it could be accomplished. Men, women, and children in open day and in public thoroughfares were shot down and murdered by a brutal soldiery with the connivance of government officers. This refers to the Camp Jackson affair. Our citizen soldiers were arrested and imprisoned. State property was seized and confiscated without warrant of law, meaning their weapons and armaments were seized. And the writ of habeas corpus had been nullified, and the brave judges who had attempted to protect by it the liberties of the citizens had been assaulted and threatened. And a tyrant president revealing in unencumbered powers had crowned all these acts of unconstitutional aggression by declaring war against a number of the states comprising the former Union. So, August 5th, he says, we're independent of the other states, not that we join the Confederacy. What happens, you have 10 senators and 39 representatives that had fled the government at Jefferson City that are now in Neosho in the southwest corner of the state. You need 17 senators for a quorum or 67 representatives for a quorum. They never get it. They don't have enough people, but they pass a secession ordinance anyway on October 28th. Finally, they say, we're seceding. Not legal because they don't have a quorum, they don't have the right to pass it, but they pass it anyway. Good enough for the Confederacy. We'll talk about that in a second. So on October 10th, the third session of the state convention meets again in St. Louis. They postpone an election now. They don't want to have one in November 1861 because they're afraid of how it'll turn out. They want to just kind of keep this pro-union government in place. All right, we'll have an election in August of next year. They create a pro-union state militia. They require a loyalty oath. The fourth session will meet back in Jeff City in June. They'll require a loyalty oath for basically any kind of public officials and all voters. If you want to vote, you got to take an oath to the union, so you can tell this is a very pro-union government, but it's also, you can see where people might have an issue with having to do this. And they attempt to abolish slavery. The vote does not pass. The fifth session will happen in June of 1863. They'll pass an ordinance of gradual compensated emancipation to be completed by 1870. Hamilton Gamble will die in office in 1864. The new Missouri State Constitutional Convention meets at the Mercantile Exchange. It was convened by Arnold Krekel. And on January 6th, they abolished slavery by a vote of 60 to 4. Now, the 13th Amendment didn't pass until February 1864. 1865. Misprint on my slide. I apologize. But Missouri abolished slavery before the federal government did. So, interesting. Abolished by this convention here. Ordinance of gradual compensation and emancipation. And then they just said, forget it, we're just going to abolish it. Well, that's it. That's what happened in Missouri in 1861 and with these different conventions. Here are my sources. You can read that. And I'd like to thank you for watching this video. I hope to put it out on Monday, January 6th. Our meeting will be January 7th at 7 p.m. at the Catherine Linneman Library in St. Charles. And thanks again for watching, and I hope you have a great day.